Good evening and welcome back to my brand new YouTube channel. My name is Sammy and this is my second ever video on here, and I've had a little think about how I want this journey to continue and how my channel will come across to the public. I went back to my roots and why people follow me in the first place and why people appreciate my work, and that's all because I'm so unfiltered, uncensored and just unwavering in my crazy and brazen approach, you could say. I don't hide my opinions and I don't intend to continue by hiding my opinions. So, without further ado, let's get straight into topic number 1 of Straight Up Sammy. That's what we're calling it. Topic number 1 is the Red-Green Alliance. And that's not anything to do with any football team or soccer team you guys might support or not support. It's to do with the red being the communist socialist bastards and the green being the Islamist bastards. So, I told you we're going to start off saucy. Why does this alliance exist? Why do we see it at every Palestine protest across the West? Where does it come from? And why is it so bizarre? And why do I think it actually makes a whole lot of sense? So let's start with what it is. Every single time you go down to one of these protests, and if you've seen my content, I've done it enough times, you see basically two types of people. You see the demoralized radical lefties who are just down on life, have blue hair, piercings through their skull, you know. You got the socialists, and you have the Islamists. And there's pretty much nowhere in between. You get the comfortable middle to upper class liberal women, but it's usually the radical left alphabet brigade, that, and then you have the Islamists. And there's really two factions. The same was seen in Iran in the 70s, before the Islamic Revolution. The socialist students were teaming up with the Islamists. So what's the significance of this alliance, the Red-Green Alliance? I have a number of beliefs on this topic, and I'm going to get into them as soon as you subscribe to this channel and share this video. Let's do this. Right. You might have noticed I was rather unkind in my description of both factions within this crazy, radical hate and destruction movement, and there's a very good reason for that. I described the lefties as demoralized. And the Islamists are too, to an extent. So let's get into that. Let's delve into why. With the leftists, I describe them as demoralized because many of them, from my experience, that is the best way to describe them. You look at them and you see a shell of a human being. And that's contrary and contrast to usually their background, which is typically privileged for them to have got to this place of these crazy idealist values. You can't get to a place where you hold such strong idealist and emotionally driven values without privilege, or at least it's very difficult to, which is why in the West you usually see the middle to upper class holding these ridiculous liberal values. And those are of equality of outcome and these handouts and of oppression as your only identity, all of these things. The radical left, from what I've witnessed, from my experience, are typically from very privileged, or at least somewhat privileged backgrounds. And that's relative to the world and human history, so it's not saying much. You don't have to have access to a huge amount of money in the Western world to be able to avoid any sort of real hardship. And I believe that any sort of hardship is essential for the human existence, is essential for the human brain, and is essential to have perspective and gratitude for what we have in this world. So when we don't have this hardship, and when we build these societies that deliberately avoid this hardship, why are we shocked that we build these useless children and people with these insane utopian idealist values that are doing everything to destroy our conservative societies based on Judeo-Christian and moral values that have been built over thousands of years? Why are we shocked that when we build societies around comfortability, that this comfort comes back to bite us in the arse? So, I really do believe the vast majority of these crazy communist socialist values come from not just the indoctrination at the universities, which are mostly funded by Qatar, and university lecturers are so indoctrinated by Soviet dogma and propaganda. I really do believe it comes from a place of so much privilege that you lose total perspective for reality. And that's where the left comes from. And that comes to what I describe them as, which is demoralization. They are demoralized individuals for the most part. Now let's get on to the Islamists. I believe they too are extremely demoralized people for the most part. And I'll tell you why. Because it's totally different to the radical left. The Islamists, or I should just say the Muslims are told by their prophet that they have the last word from God. They are told that Islam is the last word from God, and the words before, i.e. the Old Testament and the New Testament, are still to be used, but with the lens of the Quran, with the lens of Muhammad. And we are looked down upon as Jews and Christians by Islam because we changed our book and we've adjusted it to the adaptations and the evolution of humans in society, whereas Islam does not. And they are told they have the last word from God. And why is that seriously significant, especially when we're talking about demoralization? Well, there are about 50 Arab states, thanks to their colonization efforts. There are about 50 Arab states, and the vast majority of the population of all of them are living in some level of squalor, floating around the breadline and really just putting enough food on the table. And in many places such as Yemen and Sudan, they're not even putting food on the table. I believe 60% of the population in Yemen are experiencing a famine. It's just terrible. And they're told they have the last word from God. So when they open their phones and they see skyscrapers in the Jewish state, they see skyscrapers in all the Christian states, they see happiness, wealth, and abundance, that's got to bring about a level of demoralization, I'm sure. So, this is just one of the many reasons I believe that this is actually the perfect alliance, and it's not strange at all. After all, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And it should go without saying, when you look at an Islamist and you look at a radical leftist, they're not going to be friends for very long. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Let's move straight on to, what do these societies actually end up looking like in reality? From Qatar to Sudan to communist Russia and China. Let's get into some of that, shall we? I've been to Egypt and Jordan, and what I witnessed was quite alarming, and it woke me up to a lot of what we take so terribly for granted in the West, and that is our freedoms, but also our abundance, and those two words you'll hear me say a lot. First of all, let's start with our freedoms. In both an Islamist and a communist society, you do not have freedom of speech, you do not have freedom of thought, you do not have freedom of political opinion or religious beliefs. You do not have freedom as a woman. You do not have freedom, most likely, as a gay person. Here's a little anecdotal story for you. My travels in Egypt were very, very interesting. I enjoyed them very much, but like I said, they were very eye-opening. I was sat down at the table eating with an Egyptian Muslim family, and I brought up some political topic, or loosely political topic, relative to Europe. Nothing to do with Egypt, not to do with Israel, not to do with anything I thought was relevant. And I was immediately shut down. Immediately just stopped talking, changed the subject. I spoke to the friend who brought me and invited me into the home later on, and he just said, first of all, he made sure there was no phones in the room before he said that we just don't talk about politics in Egypt. They just don't. And the environment which I witnessed and the mood in Egypt which I witnessed was very much dog eat dog, and that is including within families. People within their own families will turn on their siblings, will call the police and get them whisked away, and they'll never be seen again for what they accidentally let out of their mouth at the dinner table, politically. No political jokes anymore. Nothing can be said as a joke in these societies, and that is very much seen, from my understanding, in these socialist, communist societies too. In Islamic society, you do not have freedom of political thought or religion. Islam and Islamists have been known to slaughter Christians and Jews and Hindus from India to Nigeria to Israel to Europe. In communist societies, you usually do not have freedom of religion. You definitely do not have freedom of political opinion. People get arrested and never seen again and put to death for their difference of political opinion. So, lots of similarities between the red and the green. Let's move on from political and freedom-based to abundance. In Islamist societies, typically, the oligarchy relating to government hold and hoard all of the wealth, and the rest live in poverty. As I witnessed very much so in Egypt, and maybe slightly less so in Jordan, but that's just because they have a little bit more material wealth. In Soviet and communist and socialist countries, for example China, you can't be a big business owner without being a part of the government. The government own you if you are a big business owner. So if you want to be rich, you better want to be part of the government too, because you don't have a choice. So generally, with both the Islamist and the communist societies, you're left with a two-class system, which is the oligarchy, which is unbreakably linked to the government, whether they like it or not, and the everyone else class, people who are just fighting to put food on the table. Obviously, this is extremely undesirable, and I'm going to leave you with a few thinking points here for you guys. First of all, if you haven't noticed, things are getting much more expensive and difficult in the West, especially for rent and for food, especially with just cost of living. The middle class is being eroded. We live in roughly three-class systems, and that is essential for capitalism, because capitalism is a meritocracy. I want to leave you with this quote from a certain George Orwell. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Let's not end up in societies where we have like Gaddafi and Assad houses with gold-plated machine guns, gold-wrapped toilets. That's what the government-linked oligarchy gets to. That's what will happen, and everyone else will be fighting for bread. That's the reality of most of the world. And our Western, coddled, cushy, comfortable societies are leading us to this illusion. It is totally a delusion. Stay hard, peace through strength, and I will see you at the next one.